You ready?
There were three of them, and I think I like the second one better.
In the world of human resources,
Yeah, this is way better.
It's way better. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to play that whole thing at the end of this episode, and
Okay.
folks can hear what AI did with one of Vivian's, not her all-time favorite band, but one of her favorite bands.
So I have a funny story with the Bluestones. One of the reasons they're one of my favorite bands is because I go to Music Fest in Allentown every year.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard of Music Fest, but Music Fest is one of the largest free music festivals in the country. And it's like 50 years old. So it's been going,
really?
it's an entire week long, and there are hundreds of different artists, and they're all throughout Bethlehem. And it's like 7-block radius, and it's just this big thing.
Yeah.
And my girlfriend lives not that far from there. So every year the two of us just go to Music Fest together. And I met them when they were debuting, and they were on this tiny little sound stage in front of the Arts Quest building, where it was just like this little pop-up tent, and the two of them in, their guitars playing in front of this tiny little audience of people sitting on picnic tables, just listening to them. And I'm like, you ever hear something and you're like, that is going to be big.
Yeah.
That was my first reaction to them. Like, I'm sitting there listening to them. I'm like, you have something. You're going somewhere. So I'm going to listen to your entire, because I was actually walking to meet my friend at that point. So I stopped, told her I'd be a little later, sat there and listened to their whole concert, and then went and met up with her afterwards. And then 3 weeks later, they became the biggest bands in Canada.
So by the way, we're recording. We're ready. Right. We're doing it. We're using this whole thing.
Okay.
But what I want to say about that is, you would know, because you have a special family connection, deep connection to music.
Yes, I do.
Don't you?
So it's even deeper than I've ever told you about. So my grandmother, my father's father's sister is Norma Zimmer. And she was the lead soprano on the Lawrence Welk show for years and years and years. So anytime I talk to somebody who's my parents' age, 60s, 70s, I mention Norma Zimmer, and they're like, oh yeah. And I'm like, that's my grandaunt. And my grandfather wrote the foreword to her, the first chapters of her biography. So she has this biography. It was actually a very popular book in the 60s. And he wrote the first 2 chapters of it. So he himself, my grandfather, was a very famous model. And so he was a very famous model, but he also had a degree in opera from Juilliard.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
So music runs really deeply in my family.
Wow.
Really deeply. And then my father was a bass guitarist for a band called Every Mother's Son. And they had this bubblegum pop music top 10 hit called Come On Down to My Boat Baby, which is exactly as kitschy and campy and cheesy as the name of the song sounds. But they were very famous for a while, and they were at the top of the charts for a long time, and they traveled all over. And my dad used to travel with the Who and Jefferson Airplane.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then he got drafted. So kind of a sad story there, but it was one of his formative experiences, as you can only imagine. And so music has always been this very underlying deep thing in my family. Yeah.
Me too. We have that in common. My dad was a classical guitarist. My mom was a pianist. I played violin. Music is the thing that I do for self-care. I just walk around, I put in my headphones, and I have, interestingly, I listen to the same thing over and over again. I will listen to the same song 20 times in a row. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. It drives my husband crazy. He's like, I don't understand. You already heard that song. I'm like, yeah, but every time
it's still good.
It's different. Every time you hear something over, it's like, oh, I caught that note or that bridge or that phrase, and it's a different experience.
Yeah.
Or how you're feeling at that moment informs how you interpret the lyrics, if it's a really meaty lyrics kind of song.
Yeah.
And it can just basically help you. It's therapy. I love music. So,
yeah, me too. Yeah. You were a musical theater kid, right?
So I was in musical theater in high school, and I had 4 years of operatic voice lessons, and I have never sung again after college, because one of those things where, imposter syndrome,
Sure.
I permanently blame my imposter syndrome problems on voice lessons, because
Interesting. Yeah.
when you start to microanalyze every breath that you take, it informs how you microanalyze everything that you do later in life. And so it's a permanent kind of way that I look at the world. Like I look at every single thing that I do under this microscope because of the way I was trained from the age of 14 to the age of 19.
So a great teacher makes such a huge difference in a student's life. And I had a violin teacher like that once. I took some violin lessons with a violinist who was very accomplished, and I never forget this. One of our lessons, he said, because he had me sing something. I was trying to play something that was beyond my skill level at the time, and he's like, "Oh, let's just stop. Why don't you try to sing this?" And so I sang it, and he said, "Oh, you have a beautiful singing voice. It's a shame you didn't have better violin teachers as a kid." And oh, that hurt.
Ouch.
And it was absolutely true. It was true. I would say I have a beautiful singing voice, but I'm all right. But it just devastated me, and I remember the feeling of wanting to throw my violin in the trash as I was walking home that day. And it reminds me, we're talking a lot on LinkedIn right now about L&D, the future of L&D, right? And what happens when information is ubiquitous and infinitely accessible to all of us all the time? What does that mean about the future of the L&D function? And I think there's two really prominent things. One is learning community, right? So putting people together with tools, not in isolation. I do a ton of learning in isolation, and it's great, but it's also problematic because I go down rabbit holes and I end up creating things that just are massively overcomplicated. See the whole website update thing, right? Like I had a great conversation with Tofik from Echo yesterday because their website is awesome, and he was like, "This is great, for your current skill set, and you just need to do three things here, right? Hero section, testimonials, one call to action." I had like 4 different calls to action on this thing, right? And so that is me learning in isolation, right? Not in community. So I think part of community. And I think another big part of it is making it safe for people to learn. So I want to ask you, like, what has made it safe for you to learn about HR technology? Because I'm sure you didn't grow up thinking, "Boy, I want to go into HR technology," right? You had to learn a lot in HR and about HR tech. What enabled that learn for you? Did you learn it all on your own? Did you have mentors? What was your approach, and how do you approach it now?
So that's an odd question, like for me to think of from a path perspective. I started out my life pre-med. I was going to be a doctor, and then I was going to be a nurse practitioner. And then I realized healthcare wasn't for me. And then I got a degree in English, but I had to finish that degree because now my student loans were due, and oh my God, I got to pay for them.
And you went for the lucrative field of all the
English and communications. Yeah, English and communications. I started in marketing, and then because what do you do with communications but marketing? And always knew that it was either gonna be human resources or communication. And then I got laid off from marketing. I used to work for Lucent Technologies. It was my first job out of college. And then at the point I got laid off, it was like, all right, well, marketing isn't working out. Let's try HR. And that's how I got my foot in the door in recruiting. So I got a job as a sourcing coordinator at a small staffing firm. And at that point, you're talking the days before ATSs were really huge and really popular. So we were using this like Access database to track candidates that was so horribly painful to use. It was, I had paper files like knees deep, and it was just absolutely miserable. And then I switched to being an agency recruiter, same deal. We were using a system called Goldmine, and that system was just literally, great name.
I want to use Goldmine. Sounds great.
It was just, again, like an Access database. Imagine like the worst DOS interface that you've ever seen. There were days where I felt like I was in the movie War Games, where it was like, "Hello, Alex," like that kind of face. So like it was always always a problem that I felt needed to be solved. Back when I
Mm.
was working in marketing, one of the formative experiences for me when I was working for Lucent, because I was working for their optoelectronics division, was going to Macworld at the Javits Center
Mm.
as like
Mm.
an early 20-year-old. And this is back in the days where the Macs were these big candy colored giant things that would sit on your dashboard, like your desk. And you were lucky to have this giant bubble of a thing.
Yeah.
And so like technology has always been this underlying thread of my interest.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got into recruiting and that interest in the background, it became more and more obvious to me that there was a huge gap, at least in what I'd been exposed to
Mm-hmm.
in the technological solutions that I was using. So fast forward a couple of years, switched to working at Connexa and was a recruitment process outsourcing recruiter. So basically meaning that I worked for a bunch of different companies, mainly pharmaceutical companies, and every one of them used a different ATS. So every client that I would work with, and generally it was the same client at the same time, or I'd have a year-long contract with one client, they were using something of their own. At one point I was working with Microsoft as a client, and Microsoft had their own homegrown version, and it was the worst thing I've ever used. It was a gold mine.
Interesting.
And this theme just kept coming up to me over and over again, that whoever designed the system has no idea what I do for a living. And it just kept coming back over and over and over again as I was exposed to all of these different technologies, until finally, at this point, I'm managing a team of 16 recruiters, and I'm working for a pharmaceutical company as their ops manager, again, through RPO. So I'm contracted. And Connexa is the owner of the ATS software that they had sold them. It's called 2XR. So think of a bad knockoff of iCIMS. That's what 2XR was. Though in some places it was actually better. And I won't get too deep into that, but they had no one to administer their ATS. So they were like, your company sold this to us. We don't know what to do with it. Here.
Yeah. Yep.
And here I am, the accidental admin. I have a tangential software background because everyone in my life around me, friend base, my husband, everyone that has surrounded me does software development. My husband's an electrical engineer. A lot of his friends are coders. So like the language is something that I hear from an immersion perspective. So when people started like talking to me about all the technical problems, I'd be like, why do I understand what you're saying? I have no IT background. So just learning by osmosis from my friends in like circle, it just kind of naturally came up that way. Yeah.
Community.
Yeah.
So you had a community that made it safe for you, and you could ask questions and not be concerned that somebody's going to dismiss you or patronize you, etc. Right?
Yeah. Well, they're all guys, so patronize.
Okay. Let's talk about that. Yes. What's that like?
Being a woman in tech, you get used to a certain level of little lady, you don't know what you're doing.
Got it. Yeah.
And you just learn to dismiss it as, okay, this is just how the world interfaces with me. So to a certain extent, and most of it because there were family and friends was in good humor, but that actually helped me develop a thick enough skin to not be offended by it when I came across it in a professional setting.
Yeah.
So to a certain extent, it's a little different when you're configuring software than it is when you're coding. And that's a weird little dichotomy that I would run into all the time. Is occasionally I would work with some of the teams that would be coding, and the females on that side would always kind of have a really rough time getting themselves heard. And I'd empathize with that. So community, yes, very much so. But there's always dynamics within a community, and those things, good and bad, teach you how to navigate.
Got it. So you've been doing this for a while, and you've seen a lot of change. How has your perspective on HR technology evolved since you started?
It's noisy. When I first started, it was
noisier than other areas.
I have limited exposure to other areas.
Yeah.
But the place where I say it's the reason that I personally feel that it's noisy is when I started, it was an ATS and a background check vendor. And then you added skills assessments, and then
Mm-hmm.
you added
Mm-hmm.
interview technologies, and then you added texting, and then you added all of these different ancillary bolt-on things that started becoming part of, you needed a CRM, and like you needed all these things. And it's like, I was perfectly happy driving around my Ford Fiesta, but now why do I need a Lexus?
Mm-hmm.
They both get me from point A to point B. One has better gas mileage. I don't get all of the points, or at least, when I was in the recruiting world, that started to be my general feeling, because you get a bit of systems fatigue when you're asked to learn all of these different pieces and parts. Like, think of all the apps you use on a daily basis. And every time you log into an app, something is slightly different and in a different place than you expect it to be. And you've got to learn it. And there's this giant learning curve, and that can get fatiguing. So I always have a lot of empathy for the customers that I work with,
There you
because
go.
they're
Yeah.
constantly asked to change and pivot and find the next great thing and chase that, perfect imaginary world where everything works exactly like it's supposed to. And I've been in that situation so many times in my career that it is something that I've tried to find ways to take the pain from an 11 to a 5 as often as possible. I can't take it away, but I can help.
So here's the thing, and the developers of even the best product, they're and the most empathetic developers, let's say, who are really doing a good job anticipating the impact on the end user, they are thinking about it mostly within the context of the product that they're working on,
Mm-hmm.
right? And because they don't work in TA and haven't sat in the seat of the folks who are going to use this software, I'm speculating
Yeah.
that they're not going to be able to extend that empathy beyond their product, right? And so that's where your experience across many different platforms, actually working in TA, et cetera, gives you an overall understanding of, I love it, and that term toggle tax, right? Having to flip from one tab to another, one system to another. It is incredibly draining. And I don't think that can be underestimated, particularly when you consider that these folks' jobs is not to be technologists, right? These folks' jobs, specifically, the whole point of their job is to make genuine connections with people and persuade them to come work for the company, right? And I just remember when I was managing supervisors, I just remember the stacks of paper and neatly piled stacks of paper, and just seeing recruiters working on the stacks of paper and just thinking like, wow, this is taking up a lot of time, right? But then also when that paper started to go away and it was replaced by computer systems, right? Watching them click through things, seeing them get frustrated, being unable to do things that you could do with a phone call or a handshake or whatever, right? That just, like, the technology was designed to make things better, and it seemed to just be making things worse, right? So where are we today in 2025, where we have like technology like that you and I dreamed about, like, Star Trek level technology is now real, right? Or very, very close, where I'm just talking to the computer now, right? And it's not quite Star Trek grade. I can't just, I
It's
guess I
getting
could
there.
if I was comfortable with Alexa or something like that, then I'd probably be even closer, but I'm not, right? But where do you think HR, like in optimal scenario, right? Like the company that is investing in the right tools and the right collection of tools and really being empathetic to their end users, like where do you think we can be? Where are we now? Where can we be?
I think I've been through several paradigm shifts in my career. The paradigm shift from Access Database to ATS, the paradigm shift from paper to Access Database, the paradigm shift right now from standard SaaS systems to AI. So if you think about the thing that industry has not been great at in every one of those experiences, in my opinion, is the empathy for the human being who has to go through the learning and rethink everything they've ever done in order to adopt the new technology.
Right.
It's just, here, figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's how every experience that I've had in each one of these paradigm shifts has gone. And so at this particular moment in time, I think one of the hardest challenges I read about people having and have witnessed myself with the paradigm shift to industry, basically touting the AI tool as the next great thing, which it can be, is that lack of empathy. Because on both sides of the house, whether it's the recruiter or the candidate experience, the AI isn't a person, and it's very impersonal by its nature. So the recruiters are having a hard time getting through the layers of technology that are intended to help them to find the real people. And then the people who have the backgrounds are having a hard time getting through the layers of technology to find the recruiters. So I feel like it's becoming a bit of a roadblock. And so I'm hoping that there will be mindful development. But my fear at this particular moment in time is that my experience in the software development aspect of this business over the last 20 years has been that people that do this job don't do the development. And because those people don't do the development, they don't understand why giving me an AI filter that filters out all of these things isn't necessarily going to help me find that perfect candidate, because some of those things aren't tangible. They're not things that can be on paper. If I understand that the way that you write, if you're in for example, this career is being threatened by it. If I'm trying to hire somebody for a communications role, I'm looking for an eloquently written resume. Well, now I can't look for that anymore because AI wrote that resume. So everybody's got an eloquently written resume. So as a recruiter, like, they're at an unprecedented time, though there have been many paradigm shifts again over the last 20, 30 years. But at this particular moment in time, there are so many challenges facing our customers, the people that we work with on a daily basis, and the candidate population that they serve, because of the technology, not in spite of the technology. And that's something that, I think we're going to have a very interesting time as we watch this evolve.
Yeah. I'm thinking back to when my dad was sending out letters. I mean, this must have been like circa 1987. And I remember him and my mom sitting on the living room floor, hundreds of envelopes, carefully folding resumes, licking the stamps, writing the addresses. And here's a funny story. He told me this a couple weeks ago. The interview that he got that eventually led to us moving to Cincinnati, he got a job at a company called Cincinnati Electronics. Or maybe it was GD. I can't remember. Anyway, so the feedback that he got from he got the job, and the feedback from the hiring manager was, Bob, it's funny, you don't have any relevant qualifications for this job, but your resume, the cover letter that you wrote certainly makes it sound like you do. And then that's why we're hiring you. And they hired my dad to be a business writer based on the quality of his writing. Not possible today. No.
Can't trust it.
Crazy, right? So I'm wondering, you and I are always thinking about impact on the end user, impact on the candidate. Candidate experience is a passion of ours. It's how I got my start in HR tech. Somebody asked me to analyze what it was like to apply for a job there, and I thought it was atrocious, right? Has anything gotten better for the candidate? Or has it only gotten worse? I can't tell, like, from those days when people were sending out letters and envelopes, to now when they're having to fill out the same, Workday profile over and over again for the same company. Like, has anything gotten better?
So there are some great technologies out there like Jobright.io and Simplify.io that help that experience from a candidate perspective, that let you automatically populate those multiple forms. So if I have, I'm applying
across ATSs.
Yes, across ATSs. I didn't know about that. Yeah, there's some.
Okay.
Simplify.io is one that Mitch, gentleman, both of us know, turned me on to while we were both job searching, and so there are some good technologies that help you fill applications out and kind of get over the tedium of applying. But I don't actually think that that's in candidates' benefits. And the reason that I don't think that's in candidates' benefits is because when you hit that point where you've mass applied to 400 jobs, you're it's a psychological thing at that point.
Yeah.
You know, you're applying and nobody's calling you back. And it's basically like standing in the line at an Apple store to get the first iPhone. You know, it's like you've got that. I've got to be the very first person to apply to this job to be sure that I'm going to be seen. Otherwise, now I'm competing with all of these people that are using all these bot tools to mass apply, and I'm going to get shuffled to the very bottom of the list, even if I'm the most qualified candidate. And so, from a candidate experience perspective, it's gotten better and worse because there are all these great tools to automate that tedious portion of the application process now, but those tools are being used by so many people that it's very hard to stand out. Yeah. And so one of the things that I'm finding with all of my colleagues at my previous company that was going through some shifts, and so a lot of my colleagues are on the market at this moment, is the ones that are finding positions and getting jobs again are the ones that aren't bothering with any of the technology. They're the ones going through LinkedIn and finding connections and talking to people they know. And that's how I found you when I started working with you. So like in my experience, every time I've ever found a position, it has been that way. I've done the traditional thing of going and using the technologies that I implement for a living. Yeah. But in every instance where I've ever needed a position, I've done it the old-fashioned way, picked up the phone, called people I know, asked what jobs their companies were hiring for, and been referred. So it's tough out there for a candidate because of the technology, but it's also easier because of the technology. See wrong with that?
I think a takeaway is those are excellent points. You need to be cultivating your network as your employee, no matter how much you love your job, right? You never know what's going to happen, and if you need to make a transition, you need to have a network that you can tap to help you with that next step. And yes, so when I posted that role, I immediately got a flood. I needed an ATS, frankly. Like I was doing it with a spreadsheet, right? I got a flood of recommendations from people who I know and trust and respect. And they said, oh, you got to talk to this person. You got to talk to this person. You got to talk to Vivian, right? And that's how we ended up working together, right? And I immediately had a candidate pool that was very targeted and folks who proactively reached out to me, right? So I didn't even have to ask people. And I had like 3 key people who I trust and respect who said, you got to talk to Vivian. So here we are, right? You didn't apply for a job post, of course, for a tiny company. So you can't, I don't know. I can't really. The issue, of course, is scalability, right? Yeah. So I don't know how you scale that relationship building.
And that's been the question in my entire career. Like when I was a recruiter, I would have Excel spreadsheets with cold call lists of people that worked in specific positions that I'd be trying to recruit for, and I would have a bank of networked people that I had talked to at some point, knew weren't interested at that time. It was a cold bank just of people that I would keep in touch with. And, you know, to a certain degree, I feel like technology has made that skill set less coveted in a recruiter, and that ability to, I'll tell you a crazy story. I had a colleague when I was in like agency recruiting who would pick up the phone and he would make up the craziest stories to get this person on the phone to pass the gatekeeper. Yeah. I'm Father Thomas. I'm his priest. Like, I'm not even kidding. We would take bets about what story was going to come out of his mouth that day because he had a couple of recurring ones and they worked. So that skill, that cold calling skill to BS your way past the gatekeeper. Yeah. That's a sales skill. And that sales skill in recruiting, you know, that the ones that are incredibly successful, those executive recruiters that wind up getting that really hard to find executive for some of the big companies. And the reason agencies still make big agency fees on that is because they're not using the technology. They're picking the phone up and making up a story to get to the right person. You're paying for
the relationships.
Yep. Yeah.
That's a really, really, really interesting observation. Authenticity. More and more is that like, and so I keep coming back to this, like Um, stop stop laying recruiters off.
Yeah.
You know, everyone who's listening, please stop thinking that AI is a great way. Like, I know I'm kind of Pollyanna-ish in this regard, and you know, but like, just put it in your mind that the end goal for AI does not have to be reducing headcount,
Mm-mm.
right? Like every single recruiter wants to make those connections.
Yep.
They all do, and the technology has been getting in the way, and now the technology can help take some of that stuff, take it off their plate, so they can do that. And if they're demoralized beyond the point of no return, then okay, I get it, right? But I think people are dying to have their ability to connect with other human beings magnified, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that they can do what fills them up. They're people, right? They went into this field because they love making connections with people. And if you it's a highly valuable thing. Anybody can click a button and blast out, 10,000 emails, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to be able to cleverly get past a gatekeeper, that is some social emotional
Yep.
intelligence right there.
Social
Yeah.
engineering right there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and along those lines, like I'm not saying the technology doesn't have value. There's so when I was recruiting, I would have serial applicants. This one gentleman whose name I will never forget because he applied to every job that I ever posted, every job every one of my teammates, all 16 of them ever posted, every job at another organization, another team of my colleagues had like this poor man applied to everything he was not qualified over and over and over again to the
Yeah.
point where his name became a punchline. Um,
Gosh, poor guy.
so I felt
Yeah.
terrible for him, but like
Sure.
he was flat out told after the second time he was in person interviewed, you're never getting a job with this company, give up and move on. So, like, and those were back in the days where we were allowed to say stuff like that.
Right.
We're not allowed
Yeah.
to say
Off
stuff
the
like
record,
that
sir.
anymore.
Off the
Yes,
record, you're
off the record.
blacklisted from this
Yeah.
organization.
Off record, you're actually thrown into a black hole and we don't even look at you anymore. But yeah, so like to a certain extent, the technology is incredibly helpful because I could easily filter that poor person and the many like him out and not waste my time going through those people over and over again when I knew they weren't an organizational fit. But I feel like that in and of itself is kind of a cautionary tale of where technology can cause lots of human pain because those people kept trying and they weren't flat out told, look, you're not a fit, move on, because you can't, because there's so many roadblocks to doing that. So the technology allowed me to ghost these poor people no matter how much time and energy they were wasting. So
we're going to find that guy, and that's going to be the next spotlight that we do. Sir, how's it going? No, I mean, everybody listening to this can relate. We all have had those candidates in our system, and that gets back to that relationship piece. Like we all know what it's like to be ghosted. It's such a horrible feeling. I bet I don't know. I don't know. Do young people have like a different perspective on that? Because for me, gosh, I take it real personally. Still like just
I mean, I have some teenagers in my life, all nieces and nephews, and every single one of them, that's just generally how they expect to interact with people. So if they don't want to talk to somebody, they just that's how they expect that to go.
I'm counting the minutes. Like, excuse me, I texted you 47 minutes ago.
Imogen Heap calls that text back tempo.
Oh, I like that. Text back tempo. Yeah.
There's a line in one of her songs, my self-worth measured in text back tempo.
Oh, yes.
It's always kind of stuck with me. But yeah, no, it's very hard. Not that instant gratification. I mean, I grew up before cell phones and had the first great big Nokia brick. I'm really aging myself here.
Nice.
And it was analog. And so like, I feel like our generation lives in a world before that. And so we know what not having instant gratification. I mean, I'll bet you and I are some of the few people on our team that have looked things up in a card catalog. So
I could just smell that smell.
Yes,
Say that word.
I love that smell.
I love that
but
smell.
Anyway, so like that not having that instant gratification is something that we've come up expecting, but not this generation, at least in my experience. And my niece and nephews, that ghosting is they actually, that's sus when somebody gets in touch with you again, even though their answer is no. Like they don't respond well to the no.
That
They
is the
just
response.
expect.
The
Yeah, the
non-response is
no
a
response
response.
is the response that they expect, or at least that, again, in
Yeah.
my circle, in my experiences. I have like 6 nieces and nephews, and every one of them, 5 of them are teenagers, and every one of them, that's just how they work. So, yeah.
My first mobile phone was a 50-foot long cord. Very excited to walk around the house when nobody else is home.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or when you got the first cordless phone. Oh my God, we're really aging ourselves, man. So this reminds me of a conversation with my grandmother. My grandmother was this incredible World War II veteran wife who was the executive assistant to the CFO of Citibank at one point. Like, amazing person. She's valedictorian of her class, like just super, super smart. And she was telling me a story once. She grew up in St. Mary's, Idaho, which is like the boonies, Idaho, even now. And she would tell me stories about how they would all come running out of their house to look up when they heard a plane, because it was such a rare event for them and she was telling me this as she was FaceTiming with me, because she was so amazed by the technology of FaceTime. She's like, you don't understand, this is the Jetsons that I'm having this conversation with you right now. So sidebar.
So speaking of technology doing not so great things. So to go back to the issue of technology getting in the way of people doing their jobs, a lot of that has to do with how it's set up, and then the rest of it has to do with how it's maintained. So let's talk about how it's set up. What are the biggest mistakes that you see companies making when setting the system up initially?
Over-engineering your process. Over-engineering your process is the biggest mistake I see people make over and over again. You do not need a workflow status for every single possible permutation of your process. You don't. The more heavily engineered your process is, the more confusion, the more pain, the more toggle tax, the more click-through issues. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. It doesn't matter what business you're in. Everybody does the same things. Everybody sources. Everybody screens, everybody interviews, everybody offers, everybody hires. There's 5 steps. That's it. Our entire industry can be boiled down to those 5 processes. So each one of those might have 3 or 4 steps in each one of those aspects. There doesn't need to be 50 in each one of them. And so when I would work with like huge organizations, 100,000 plus employee organizations, there was always someone pushing to add this piece of complexity where it didn't really need to be, where, all it was a minor semantic difference in the way that you were describing the step versus the step that was already there. And the long-term cost of that was you could never get accurate reporting out of it, because
great call
you
out.
could never get it. So leadership wants numbers. That is how your CTOs and your COOs and your execs and the people above you making the purchasing decision for the software that saves your life and helps you work. That's what they want to see. They want numbers. They want to be able to see that your costs have gone down and that your speed of hiring has gone up, and all the things that affect the brass bottom line of your business. That's what they care about. And if you can't report well on any of that information because you have 75 different ways to do the same thing, then that's not doing you a service in the long run. Keep it simple is the most like silly, plain, ordinary piece of advice anybody could give you, but it's the truth. You have 5 steps. Don't make it more complicated than it needs to be.
I have prided myself on being able to think through every single permutation and find a place for every single permutation. And I'm sure a lot of techie people can relate to this. It is sort of like it's like the part of my brain that was obsessed having every single baseball card of every baseball card brand. The part of my brain that to figure out how I feel about something, I make a spreadsheet out of it. It's a mentality, but it has a purpose and it's useful, but it needs to be contextualized. And somebody needs to stand up and say, we have to keep it simple, right? And that's like one of those core consulting skills. And like, how do you referee? Like, how do you work with folks who are insisting that their obscure use case is actually more important than it actually is?
Well, first and foremost, you always lead with empathy, because they're asking for it because they feel they have an unmet need. So there is some part of what they want that is not currently being served. So they have a vision for how they're going to serve it. The best way I have always found is to convince people to learn that what you are trying to do serves their need. However you need to do that from a conversation perspective. I had a client, I'm trying to think of the nuances of this story because it was at least 7 years ago, but I had a client at a large biotech company who, I don't know if you've ever been in the biotech industry, but the biotech industry has so many different divergent specialties in an organization. You've got purchasing, you've got HR, you've got the scientists, you've got like people in every single very diverse and no common ground kind of priority mindset as far as all the different departments. And we had this one stakeholder who did all of the research scientist recruiting. Think like doctors, like really hard niche people to find. 99% of them were going to be people that you would have to network with or find at a university somewhere or possibly bring in from another country. Like she had the hardest job of all of her colleagues. And then she also had somebody that did like the lab floor level manufacturing recruiting, and the two of them were at each other's throats because their priorities were so vastly different. This person was high volume, this person was niche and network and very low volume. And so this person wanted to be able to document every nuance because they had every nuance. They had the time to document every nuance because they were dealing with 10 or 15 people a week, whereas this person was dealing with 70 people a day. And so never the twain shall meet in their mindset as far as how you could get them to converge on a process. So I had them actually sit down and break their process down on a spreadsheet. You know, spreadsheets are good in certain scenarios. And I had them explain, okay, what do you actually do at each one of these steps? Tell me why you need a different step for interviewing your users than they do. And when I actually got them to talk, a lot of times being a consultant is just learning to help people communicate where they have got their walls down and can't see past their own needs.
Yeah.
And breaking through that wall so they can see how their needs and the needs of their teammates are the same. They're just using different language to explain their needs. So when I finally got the two of them to sit down and kind of talk through all of the nuances of their steps, we had a eureka moment where they're like, oh, well, it really isn't that different. So why don't we just come up with some common naming convention? And when we allowed them to brainstorm and create the process themselves together, we were able to develop a unified process they were all happy with. There were still like one or two little niche things that we developed for the high-end sourcing recruiter versus the recruiter who did the high volume had evergreens, whereas the high-end person didn't. I mean, there were some small niches that we had to specify for them, but overall, the steps from beginning to end were the same. And so from a reporting perspective, they were able to get reliable, reasonable data at the end of the day. So that was, why it was important to do.
Yep. Getting back to empathy. Yeah.
It's the most important skill in this particular profession. I personally believe empathy for the candidates, empathy for your colleagues, empathy for your leaders. Your leaders have priorities too that they're being beholden to. And, I think if you lead with empathy in every aspect of this, you ultimately win.
I think there is something about the HR technology profession specifically that lends itself to being effective enablers of empathy, of creating the conditions for dialogue between two functions that typically are I don't want to say at odds, but you got HR, they do their people thing, got IT, they do their IT thing, right? And some companies are merging the two into one function. I forget who's doing this recently. I just saw it on LinkedIn. But in any event, I think that there is some translating that needs to happen of HR's priorities and IT's priorities. And I think the folks who've been on the front lines of implementing technology mandates for slash on employee bases understand the overall impact of a and I really think so. We see a lot of folks just like you and just like me who have a strong arts, creative side, education, that sort of thing, for whom technology kind of just landed in their lap and they just had to figure it out. I think that's our superpower. I really do. I really do. And I think HR technology workers need a seat at the table for vendor selection, right? Because how do you wade through all of the hype, right? Like, how do you know what this is really going to look like in practice? And of course, we've seen many customers who aren't like realizing the dream that they had. And part of it is implementation. We talked about that. And then part of it is maintenance, system administration, right? Having somebody in that seat who has both the time, the skills, inclination, bandwidth, right, to make sure that the system continues to run smoothly and constantly grows as business processes shift and change.
Yeah. I think more than that, though. Like, there's so many different. I had a LinkedIn post a couple of weeks ago about what I call the accidental admin. And so many people that do what we do fell into it by accident.
Yes.
It was handed to them because nobody else would do it. And there's a skills gap that isn't recognized when that happens, in that now someone who doesn't have a systems background is expected to know all of the nuances of what it takes to maintain a healthy system.
Right.
And there's no empathy from leadership. We were talking about learning earlier. There's no empathy from leadership in the fact that those folks are in a position where they're being thrown things from every angle, and they don't have all the context for the decisions they're being asked to make. So they make the best decisions that they can within that environment. So like, probably 60% of the implementations that I was given over the 500 plus implementations of iCIMS that I did, most of those folks would tell me, I don't know what I don't know. It was like the opening line to every conversation that I would have with every one of them. I don't know what I don't know, and that's what I need you for.
Yep.
Well, I don't know your business. I don't have all the context for what your ins and outs and nuances of what you're trying to do are. I know software, and I know talent acquisition from having been in talent acquisition myself. You're going to have to help me get you there as far as the different moving pieces. And so there's an education gap in a lot of the system administrators that I work with. They don't even know that they have. So the whole data management, the whole database maintenance conversation, the training that we're doing, many of the folks that we've expressed that this is something we're bringing up are very interested in it because they don't know what it takes to keep a database up and healthy, because it's not their day job. Many of them are still recruiting on top of being system administrators, and system administrator is like a subline of something that they didn't even realize when someone handed them an ATS somebody needed to do. So I think that you don't see this in enterprise softwares. You don't see when somebody implements a procurement software. IT manages that. IT owns it from the very beginning. You have a support system. You have the expectation that someone is going to need to maintain this. Whereas in applicant tracking systems, I don't know why, but there's this persistent misperception that I've never seen broken, that they just don't need that kind of maintenance and they don't need that kind of oversight. And they do, because you're dealing with human information. You're dealing with personal identifying information. There was I read Mac Rumors, which is a site where they talk about hacks and like all kinds of security threats and stuff like that. In the morning, and today there was literally somebody who found a random hard drive out there with hundreds of thousands of people's passwords to different apps, including their login information that wasn't hidden behind a firewall and was just randomly sitting there out on a network. And, so those kinds of mistakes have real impacts on human beings. And there is PII in ATSs. There's, dates of birth and socials and identifying information and how much money the person makes. And like, this is important software from a perspective of information security. And I feel like that is a very overlooked aspect because the people that we're working with don't know to think that way. That isn't how they're trained. That isn't their fault.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I can totally relate to that. You simply don't know what you don't know. You don't know what the right questions are to ask until you encounter that or somebody's told you, right? If you're new, if you're new to the profession, what's the best way to figure some of those things out? I'm not trying to turn this to commercial for SAI, of course. We're working on some great content material, some great learning experiences. But like, aside from that, what advice would you, let's put it this way. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Okay.
How could you have sharpened your learning curve just a bit?
SAI didn't exist then. So when I first started in this space, one of the first things I was fortunate enough to do, because I worked for the company that sold the software that I was working in, was to go to the implementation team and be like, what do I not know, and help. So in that community, again, community. It doesn't matter if you're talking SAI, but like find your most techie friend and ask them to explain the ins and outs of the various pieces to you. And if you don't have that, there's LinkedIn Learning, there's Khan Academy, there are so many, YouTube, there are so many resources I didn't have when I started in this profession. If there is something you desire to learn, someone out there is desiring to teach it. So you just have to find it. And that's one of the great places for AI, because AI can help you narrow down the resources that you need to have. But just taking like a basic database infrastructure training might be a very helpful thing. There'll be a lot of information in there you don't need to know, but a lot of it you can contextually apply. Taking a basic training on data analytics will be important to you, because when you understand all the nuances of what you may need to have in order to get meaningful data, it will help you understand what data you need to have in the system in order to be able to get that data. So a really common mistake I see made in iCIMS all the time in implementation is not bringing over enough data from a data table perspective to be able to break security rules and reports and dashboards out. If you don't know what department all your employees are in, you can't show them a report by their department. Like it's that simple. The system is only, I say this over and over, any system is only as smart as the data you give it. Because systems, I mean, think about AI. Most AI right this moment is only trained to 2023. So most of them are not trained on anything currently happening right this moment.
Well, fortunately, nothing interesting has happened since 2023, so we're good.
But yeah, so like when you try to actually pull those systems, those great large learning language model systems, they're missing 2 years of context.
Yeah.
And so hold what they tell you with that grain of salt, because they're missing 2 years worth of information, and quite a bit has happened in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, just I'm on a tangent. Going back to, what kind of trainings you can take. Think of like basic database maintenance and infrastructure and database architecture types of trainings. They may not intuitively seem like something that you would need to know, but knowing them would really help you, especially when you're working with SAP or Oracle. Those two systems are dinosaurs. Sorry, they are. And they're based on frameworks of data that, you need a consultant for every module in order to figure out, because they're so heavily architected. And so if you understand how a database works, you're going to have a lot easier time understanding why you need a person for the payroll module, and you need a person for the ATS module, and you need a person for each module, because their Workday's the same. Like Workday has so many different moving parts that each individual module needs an expert because they're all so different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This episode is sponsored by SAP and Oracle.
Sorry.
Just kidding. So to go back to AI and learning, I was thinking of it as like AI can give you the 101 version of
Yes.
anything, right? And if you choose to, you can start off at 201. And that's how I felt talking to Tawfiq yesterday about the website. Like I was able to get value from his level of expertise that I don't think I would have been able to get otherwise, right? But it's a fantasy to think that independently with AI, I would get to where he's at. Because he designed their website. I forgot to mention that. So he's both the founder of Echo, but he also was a web designer in a previous career. And so like it gave me access to engage him at a higher level much more quickly than I would have otherwise. And I think that is a missing piece in a lot of the conversation about learning and AI. It's like, and in general, right? Like we're not, I don't think, even close to needing fewer great teachers. I think there are so many great teachers who never were able to thrive because of various things that impact education, right? Systemically, right? I see so many more great teachers coming up and being able to elevate everyone's skill set, right? Through AI. That's the potential for me. And again, it's like, yes, there are bad things that can and will happen, right? But I think we really need to focus on what is possible and what good things can happen because there's just enormous opportunity to upskill and unlock connection, authenticity, creativity. Let's wrap up with what's the most rewarding project you've ever worked on? I'd like to hear about that.
Oof, there have been so many. But I'm going to have to go back to one of my first. So I won't name the customer, but I was handed a customer while I was working for Connexa and implementing 2XR, who had been in implementation for 2.5 years when they were handed to me.
Mm.
And they were still not live. Big retail company. There was just
Sorry, typical implementation for a company that size, what would it be?
About 20 weeks.
Okay. Wow.
16 to 20 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So and it was the same stakeholder.
Ooh.
And she had gotten a bad reputation on the team because she was trying to solve the needs of so many different external pressures and forces that were being exerted on her, and trying to articulate them in a way that the person that was helping her implement would understand her level of urgency. And at a certain point, some of my colleagues started basically saying, you know, this person is using perfect as the enemy of good. Like they just don't understand what good enough is.
Yeah.
And so when I got the account, she had actually gotten to a point where she had asked certain people to be taken off the account. And they were like, good luck here. She's really difficult.
Yeah.
She wasn't really difficult.
Yeah.
And I've had this kind of experience more than one time in my career, but the problem was that they weren't listening to her enough. And so I said, act like you've done nothing. Tell me everything you need. Let's start from square one. And so I had her live in 7 weeks.
Wow. Wow.
And then they sundowned the product.
And then they what?
Sundowned the product.
Oh.
Yeah. And then I had to learn brass ring.
Tragic.
And I helped her implement brass ring and go through that whole process over and over again.
Yeah.
So the reason I'm most proud about that is A, I got her live on 2XR when no one else could.
Yeah.
But B, I was able to help her navigate the fury that she understandably and rightfully felt when IBM came to them and her and said, sorry, we're not going to let you use this product anymore. We're sundowning it. After she had just been implementing it for almost 2.5 years. Heartbreaking.
Wow. Yeah.
And so, you know, I came to her and I was like, look, I don't have any control over this. This is what's happening. Here's a promise I'm going to make to you. I'm going to learn this new system I've personally never worked with before. Let's learn it together. Let's figure out how to get you live. And she ultimately wound up going live with KBR. I helped her go live with KBR in 20 weeks. So it took another 20 weeks for her to go live with KBR. But all of the things that we had learned, I said 16 before, it was about 20. All of the things that we had learned together about her process and the things that she needed helped inform us in building the new system. And so ultimately it made such a difference for her that I understood where she was coming from and what she needed. And that understand empathy, again, I keep talking about empathy, was the thing that ultimately got her over that line. So that's probably the one that I'm most proud of. And it was one of the first.
That's amazing. The trust is really so valuable. And when that exists, like, you know, a lot of things where we can figure out the technology, you know, like, you know, across different systems and whatnot, so much of it is built around the same concepts and just figuring out how that specific technology was configured, right? But the trust of, you know, for somebody to enjoy working with you enough that even for the whole thing to just completely fall apart, that they were like, yep, let's do this again. That's amazing, and that speaks volumes for your consultative manner. Well, Vivian, this has been a goldmine of insights. Thank you so much for speaking with me today. If you're listening to this and you're an iCIMS customer, we have a community, a learning community specifically for iCIMS system administrators. Over 300 iCIMS customers are in there to date, talking daily in a supportive, safe space for conversations where you'll find people who have a similar level of empathy and regard for the end user and passion for nerdy configuration conversations. It's really, really a unique space. You can go to systemadmininsights.com and search for join a free Friday call. You can join our Friday calls for free. We do that every Friday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. And then membership brings some additional perks like small group office hours with folks like Vivian and other members of the IRD team who have all sat in your seat as system administrators, working with iCIMS specifically, as talent acquisition professionals, working as recruiters, TA managers, etc. It's really, really very special value that we've created there. So hope to see you there. Vivian, once again, thank you so much for speaking with me today, and we'll talk soon.
Of human resources where people and tech collide. There's a community shining bright with stories from the inside. System Admin Insights, that's the name of our show. Meeting the unsung heroes who make HR technology go. We make software work for companies all around. On System Admin Insights, our stories can be found. HR technologists, masters of our trade. With automation and analytics, we got it made. From strategy to troubleshooting, we do it all. Keeping tech running smooth, answering each and every call. We bridge the gap between human and machine. HR tech wizards working behind the scene. We make software work for companies all around. On System Admin Insights, our stories can be found. HR technologists, masters of our trade. With automation and analytics, we got it made. We got it made. Unraveling complexity with skill and grace. In HR transformation, we set the pace. System Admin Insights brings our stories to light, showcasing expertise, passion, and all might. We make software work for companies all around. On System Admin Insights, our stories can be found. HR technologists, masters of our trade. With automation and analytics. We've got to make